Okay.
For this movie project, we were assigned to analyze the film The Insider. Our group members consist of Justin Rao, Kyle Kendall, Rachel Lasky, and Megan Pizzuti. I would like to begin our presentation with a movie trailer for the film The Insider. This is in case you haven't seen the movie or just want to refresh in your memory of the film.
Are you guys hearing anything?
Mm-mm.
No.
Megan, is the YouTube volume up on the screen?
Yes.
Hmm.
The next slide I will go over covers basic background information about the movie. The director of The Insider was Michael Mann. The production companies for the film were Touchstone Pictures as well as Spyglass Entertainment. The movie was written by Eric Roth and the director Michael Mann. The Insider was adapted from an article titled The Man Who Knew Too Much, written by journalist Marie Brenner. The Insider was an American film released in 1999 that is based on the true story of a 60 Minutes episode about the big tobacco industry. The Insider was nominated for many Academy Awards, including Best Actor in a Leading Role, which was played by Russell Crowe's character, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Director, Best Sound, Best Picture, and Best Writing Screenplay based on a material previously produced or published. The movie also takes place in Louisville, Kentucky. The next slide of information is a basic plot summary of the video. The Insider film is filled with ethical dilemmas and suspense. The movie is based on a true story relating to an episode of CBS's news show 60 Minutes. The movie begins with Wiggin, Russell Crowe, disagreeing with the company he works for. Wiggin worked for Brown and Williamson, one of the largest tobacco companies in the country. He was fired from his position as vice president because he was instructed to hide information relating to the addictiveness of nicotine. The story really begins when Bergman, Al Pacino's character, the producer for 60 Minutes, finds out that Wiggin has a story to tell. The most effective way for Wiggin to tell his story is with Bergman's help on an episode of 60 Minutes. Obviously, the tobacco companies do not want Dr. Wiggin to release the information since they believe it will hurt their profits. Wiggin risks his future by agreeing to do the interview. Wiggins is later harassed and threatened for releasing the information. Despite having the interview recorded, the CBS executives decide against airing the interview because of fear of litigation from Brown and Williamson. In the interview, Wiggin claimed that Brown and Williamson manipulated nicotine through the use of pneumonia to allow nicotine to be absorbed more rapidly into the body. He continues on to say that Brown and Williamson have ignored public health considerations to remain highly profitable. After many fights and disagreements, 60 Minutes finally broadcasts the full interview with Dr. Wiggin. This film teaches many lessons. The movie made me think about the true power of the large corporations and the news scene. It's been happening for years. Large corporations ignore negative effects of their actions in favor of profits. My belief is that a corporation's goal should not just be to provide profits, but to hold responsibility as well. Here are some of the main points I got from watching the film. The big tobacco company is trying to hide the truth about nicotine in order to make profits for themselves from the sale of cigarettes. Jeff Wiggin gets fired and Lowell Bergman hears about it. He wants Wiggin to reveal the truth about cigarettes on a 60 Minutes episode. The tobacco company does anything to stop him from talking, including threatening him and even his family. Wiggin wants to reveal the truth to the public that the tobacco companies are artificially enhancing the effects of nicotine. People who smoke deserve the right to know about their health and what they are putting into their bodies. I also believe this would be helpful for secondhand smokers as well. It would be nice to know what you are breathing in when you don't even smoke. The next slide will cover the main actors and the roles they played in the film. First is Lowell Bergman, who was played by Al Pacino. He was the producer who wanted Wiggin to release the interview about the big tobacco company. Then there's Jeffrey Wiggin, who was played by Russell Crowe. He was the whistleblower of the big tobacco acts. And then the last one is Mike Wallace, who was played by Christopher Plummer, and he was the lead reporter for 60 Minutes. And the next video I'm about to show is the 7 dwarfs, or the big 7 tobacco companies in the industry, testifying in court to the U.S. Congress. This is concerning issues about the cigarette smoking and nicotine's addictiveness, which they deny is addictive. I personally believe that the CEOs committed perjury to protect themselves and their companies from prosecution. You can see for yourself in the following video.
The cigarette company in the movie that Jeffrey Wigand works for is called Brown & Williamson. I know it says the movie is based on a true story, but I didn't think it actually be centered on a real company. I was kind of surprised to find out that it was, and it had a serious effect on the company. Jeffrey Wigand was an actual employee for Brown & Williamson, and the basic storyline of the movie is all true. Wigand really did receive death threats from this company and was forced to live secretly in hotels with the bodyguard for a long time. The company was founded in 1894 and incorporated in 1906. The brands they make include Kools, JPC, Carlton, Lucky Strike, Pall Mall, and Viceroy. They have been based in Louisville, Kentucky since 1929. They had some struggles in the 1960s when public health awareness first started becoming popular. In 1964, it was mandated that a health warning be on every package of cigarettes that was produced. In 1971, it was illegal to have television ads for cigarettes. Sounds crazy because we never had any, but it used to be common before that. In 1983, the tax on cigarettes doubled as well and have continued to go up consistently since then. The number of smokers has gone down, but their sales have somehow increased from $500 billion in 1965 to nearly $650 billion by 1980. That doesn't make sense, and the only thing that I can imagine is that people started smoking more frequently, even though people were quitting. Brown and Williamson went through tough times in the 90s as well, with some serious litigation and lawsuits starting up. In just one case, a single individual was awarded $750,000 for suing the company due to health problems after smoking for many years. State governments were also suing Brown and Williamson for healthcare costs to cover their poorer residents that couldn't pay for their healthcare costs themselves. When The Insider was released in 1999, they knew they had a serious problem and needed to do something. They suffered a 6% drop in sales, as well as terrible publicity from the story portrayed in the movie. Brown and Williamson joined forces with 3 other tobacco companies and tried to come up with an agreement to end all the lawsuits and go back to the way it was. After a couple of failed attempts, they came up with the Master Settlement Agreement. This agreement involved 46 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 U.S. territories. These 4 companies alone agreed to pay $200 billion over the next 25 years to cover health care costs for smokers. This seems really generous, but they have requirements as well. They required that all cases against them be dismissed permanently and not allowed to ever be filed again. The companies were also limited in the ways they could advertise their products from there on out. They could have no billboard ads, no cartoon characters in their advertisements, and no free samples. They used to give out free samples frequently, just like for any other product. It's a good way to market and get people interested, but they couldn't do that anymore. All in all, I think the agreement was a great idea because otherwise they would have gone bankrupt quickly, paying all the lawyer fees and all the settlements and everything. The popular show 60 Minutes was started in 1968 by Don Hewitt. He started the show because he wanted it to be different, and so he set it up as a one-on-one interview style. The show has always been known for being risky and showing very controversial interviews. In the beginning of The Insider, he is seen interviewing a leader in Syria known by the name of Sheikh. They start out the interview by asking him, "Are you really a terrorist?" They clearly like to shake things up and get the real truth about all kinds of various topics. The show is now in its 47th season of the show, and it was a top 10 show for 23 years straight, which is still a record. CBS is the company that owns 60 Minutes and that shows the show. In the movie, that is the company that stops the interview with Jeffrey Wigand from airing originally. The legal department wouldn't allow it because they said that the repercussions would be too great with the confidentiality agreement that Wigand had already signed with Brown and Williamson. Arthur Judson formed the company in 1927 under the name United Independent Broadcasters, UIB. It struggled for about a year until it was sponsored by William Paley, the son of a Russian cigar manufacturer. He gave the company $400,000 and started running the company and was able to boost profits from practically nothing up to $7.2 million by 1930 in only 2 years. The feud with NBC and other television networks has been around since then as well. CBS came up with a plan to take all the celebrities away from NBC and the other networks. They found a way for them to be taxed as corporations rather than individuals and enticed them to come and work for CBS. In 1950s, James Odbry became the president of the company. He created shows like Mr. Ed with the Talking Horse and the Munsons and Beverly Hillbillies because he believed that shows had become too serious and too dramatic. He thought that people needed silly shows in order to just relax and enjoy their entertainment. These silly shows became incredibly popular and nearly doubled CBS's profits in less than 2 years. CBS also unfortunately has some legal and financial trouble in the past 30 years. In 1985, Ted Turner of TBS announced that he was planning to take over CBS eventually. CBS reacted quickly by buying up 21% of their stock so that Ted Turner had no way of accomplishing this. But in order to do so, they had to spend approximately $954.8 million. When The Insider came out, the movie didn't portray CBS very well either. It did raise a lot of publicity, but it was very negative publicity. Wasn't what they wanted. People were upset that CBS wouldn't allow 60 Minutes to air the show originally, and some people said that Don Hewitt would have been disappointed in them. Wigand said in an interview with Charlie Rose that he believes there were other reasons why CBS wouldn't let 60 Minutes air the interview. First, he heard that one of the owners of CBS owned a tobacco company, so he didn't want anything negative about tobacco to get out. No one has ever proved this or disproved this. It's just something that Jeffrey Wigand said he heard, and he believed it because it made sense. Another idea was that CBS was already working on a $100 million deal with Brown and Williamson, and they didn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. His last idea was that Westinghouse Electric was in the process of buying CBS, which they were and did shortly after this happened. And they didn't want to have any bad press on the company to destroy the sale. Like I said, none of those have ever been proved or disproved, so we'll never know. The 2004 Super Bowl halftime with Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake also created a lot of bad publicity for CBS. Everyone remembers what happened during their song and dance routine. Janet Jackson's shirt got pulled off, and the nudity was only shown for less than a second. I think I saw that it was 9/16 of a second. The FCC claimed that the network knew about the incident before it happened, and they made it available to the public anyways, even though it was supposed to be a family show. CBS claimed that the government had recently applied inconsistent rules to indecent words and images, punishing some and ignoring others. They ended up winning the court case in 2012, 8 years later, and didn't have to pay the fine of $550,000 because they were able to get it reversed in the court of law. But either way, people will never forget that that happened. People will talk about that forever. Bernard Goldberg was another example of some bad publicity for CBS. Goldberg had worked for CBS for 28 years, until 2001 when he came out with a book, a nonfiction book, about his experience there and how he believes that their news is liberal and biased. The book ended up on the New York bestseller list, so a lot of people read it, and a lot of people were influenced by what was in it. CBS was bought out by Westinghouse Electric Company in 1995. Shortly after buying CBS, they sold all their interest in the electric companies that they had and really focused on making CBS more successful. They reincorporated later using the name CBS Corporation and completely took over. Shortly after that, CBS Corporation was purchased by Viacom, which is supposed to stand for Video Audio Communication, in 2004. Even though they were bought by Viacom, they don't control what goes on TV and what does not. It's still up to CBS. Viacom also owns companies like Paramount Pictures and BET.
Next, we're going to look at the ethical dilemmas in the film. The ethical dilemma that gets focused on the most in the film is Dr. Jeffrey Wigand's decision to become the whistleblower on Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company after he is fired for not approving of their practices. But there are also several other key dilemmas faced in this movie. Some of these include Lowell Bergman's decision to encourage Dr. Wigand to participate in the interview with 60 Minutes, CBS Corporation's decision to edit the interview with Wigand out of the segment completely in fear of being sued by the tobacco company, Leanne Wigand's decision to protect her children and leave Jeffrey Wigand, and then Bergman's decision to give the full story of CBS Corporation's decision to the New York Times. And now we're going to take a closer look at some of the key dilemmas in this film in regard to ethical theories we've been studying in this course. First, we're going to look at utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the ethical theory that argues that the best ethical alternative is the one that will produce the greatest amount of net pleasure to the widest audience of relevant stakeholders. Utilitarianism also requires that you look at the consequences to all of the stakeholders as well, while completely ignoring the motivation behind the decision maker. With regards to this theory, we're going to look at Dr. Wygand's decision on whether or not to break his silence about his work with the Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company. He has two choices in this matter, one being to break the confidentiality agreement that he signed with the company and risk losing the stability of benefits that he has for his family, as well as all the legal backlash that he would face with this decision. If he does this, however, he could potentially be saving many lives, since the public would then become aware of what the tobacco company is doing, as well as fulfilling his own need for revenge against the tobacco company for the threats that they made against him and his family in the film. His other option is just to remain silent. To choose this option would force him to keep the information about the harm he knows is being caused to the public from the tobacco company, but in turn, he would be keeping his family safe and taken care of. Dr. Wygand ultimately chooses to break the confidentiality agreement, and this was the ethical choice to make according to the utilitarianism theory. The benefits to the general public were going to yield more pleasure to a far wider audience of stakeholders than upholding the confidentiality agreement in order to keep the benefits that his family was receiving. Another dilemma that occurs in the film that we can look at in terms of utilitarianism is Lowell Bergman's decision to do everything he can to convince Dr. Wygand to blow the whistle on the Brown and Williamson Company. Early in this film, Lowell Bergman isn't really aware of what it is exactly that Wygand has information on. He only knows that the tobacco company didn't want the information getting out. So with this in mind, he couldn't really be aware of what benefits this information being exposed would bring to others, but he was made very aware of the pain that it was going to bring to Dr. Wygand and his family. So following the theory of utilitarianism, the ethical choice for Bergman really would have been to leave Dr. Wygand alone completely. With the information that he had prior to Wygand's decision to give the interview, there really would have been a higher net pleasure to keep the confidentiality agreement intact. A different example of using the utilitarianism theory in a life situation would be choosing between giving food to a friend of yours who is starving versus a large group of people who are hungry. The utilitarianism choice would be to give that food to the large group of people rather than your friend, because it yields the highest amount of net pleasure for the largest amount of stakeholders. The next theory that we're going to look at is deontology. Deontology looks at the motivation of the decision maker rather than the consequences of the decision. According to Immanuel Kant, it also means to act out of the sake of duty regardless of the consequences for yourself. He also says that deontology is a complement to utilitarianism because an action that satisfies both can be said to have a good chance at being ethical. So when Dr. Wygand decides to speak out about the tobacco company, he is acting on his obligation to inform the public about the harm that's being done to them, regardless of the harm that may come to him in turn. He wasn't necessarily acting in his own best interest, but the interest of others. Acting out of this obligation to others, Dr. Wygand's decision to break his confidentiality agreement appears to be an ethical one according to the theory of deontology. And since deontology is considered to be a good complement to utilitarianism, Dr. Wygand's decision seems to be an ethically sound one since it meets the requirements of being ethical for both of these theories. Looking at an individual's decision to obey the law would also be an effective example of deontology. Choosing not to do something because it is against the law, even though it could benefit you in some way, would be an ethically sound decision according to this theory. The third theory that we're going to look at is virtue ethics, and specifically Bergman's decision to expose CBS. Virtue ethics focuses on the moral character of the decision maker. This theory draws its inspiration from Aristotle, where for him, happiness was an activity of the soul. According to our textbook, we fulfill our goal of being happy by living a life of virtue, where virtue is a character of our soul. I think this theory presents an excellent case of analysis for Lowell Berkman's decision because he seemed to base his decisions this way throughout the film. With this theory, we're looking at CBS Corporation's decision to edit the 60 Minutes interview to not include the segment with Dr. Wygand and how that specifically affected Lowell Bergman, the producer for 60 Minutes. Throughout the film, Bergman tries to make it clear that he views himself as an individual with the highest of integrity. Integrity seems to be the highest virtue that Bergman associates himself and 60 Minutes with. Multiple times throughout the film, he states that he does everything he can to protect all of his sources and reaffirm that they can always count on him when he gives them their word, and states that 60 Minutes is a highly respectable program of integrity. So when the executives at CBS decide to cut the segment with Dr. Wygand to avoid the lawsuit with the Big Tobacco Company, it brings conflict to view of Bergman's own moral character. He felt the need to force CBS to be honest by contacting an editor at the New York Times, and he then gives him the full story of CBS Corporation's decision to cut the interview with Dr. Wygand. Because for them to choose not to air the segment meant that he would not be holding up his promises to Dr. Wygand. And for Lowell Bergman, this would mean he would no longer be seen as a person of integrity and honesty to any future sources that he would need. Another way to look at virtue ethics is to consider the belief that it is wrong to steal. It may be a religious belief, but in this sense, choosing not to steal something even though you may be in need of it, for example, money or food, it's the virtuous thing to do no matter what the consequences are to yourself.
Now we're going to be looking at the resolution to Wygand's decision regarding utilitarianism theory and ecology theory. So before Dr. Wygand goes public with the dirt that he has on Brown and Williamson, there's a scene in the movie where the CBS producer Bergman and Wallace are at a table with, I'm assuming, a couple of the writers, and they're going over, talking about Wygand, trying to come up with what they think Wygand knows, and they say, okay, the first thing this guy needs, we don't know his story, but we know he's going against Big Tobacco, the first thing he needs is defense. So Wygand initially, he's going against the risk of all the money that Big Tobacco has for this guy. You just got let go of your job. How is he going to fight that? So he's going against that. Then he has the risk of getting his severance pay cut and losing health benefits for his family. There's a scene where Wygand is brought into the office of the CEO of Brown and Williamson, and they tell him pretty much, you either keep your mouth shut or your daughter, she has severe asthma. You're not getting benefits. You're not getting your severance. So it's like, we fired you for no good reason, and now we're taking everything from you. By breaking his confidentiality agreement with Brown and Williamson, he knows that his life is going to change. Wygand brings his wife Leanne to dinner with Mr. Wallace and Mr. Bergman, and she didn't even have a clue that her husband was going to do an interview. She just thought they were having dinner, meeting these guys, and Bergman comes out with, he drops the bomb. What do you think about the interview? She gets up, she starts crying, leaves the room. So immediately there's a change in his wife. He knew this would happen. After Wygand was let go, he took a chemistry position at the local high school, and the first day he walks in class, the students are doing the standing ovation. Throughout the movie, Wygand and his family are threatened. He's assuming by Brown and Williamson. It gets pretty obvious as the movie goes along. His family moves to a smaller home. They had a really nice house when he was working as the vice president. They have to downsize. And one night, as he's sleeping in bed with his wife, his little daughter comes in and they wake up. There's a man outside. Wygand goes outside. He sees a footprint in his garden. Another example, he's checking the mail one day, and there's just one bullet shell sitting in the back of his mailbox. And yeah, final example they showed in the movie, he just has an email on his computer, and Wygand was out of the room. His wife goes downstairs. She checks it. It's a big red screen, black letters, "We will kill you, all of you." So that was the final straw for him. Wygand was really on the fence about giving this interview to Bergman, but he always saw himself as a man of science rather than a businessman. Like I mentioned, the meeting with the CEO when they wanted him to sign the confidentiality agreement, there was one or two other gentlemen in the room, and the one guy said, "Mr. Wygand," and he told the gentleman, "No, I'm Dr. Wygand." So, yeah, he made it up the ladder in the corporate world, but he really always considered himself a scientific man. So giving his interview to 60 Minutes was really the only way he could consciously go on with his life. He knew he had to notify the public. So really, it was an easy ethical choice. Without all the threats, obviously. If you or I had that knowledge and we didn't have all these death threats, and see your child suffering with asthma, they're going to cut your medical health benefits. It's a no-brainer. So for utilitarianism, Wygand just looked at the ethical decision that would produce the greatest amount of pleasure to the widest audience of stakeholders, so smokers, because he felt like he was a voice for the voiceless. Nobody really had this information given to him. You have big tobacco hiding it, burying it, and like we showed you the clip of the Seven Dwarfs, they're all constantly denying. There's no addiction. There's really nothing so bad about cigarettes. You just give us your money, keep giving us your money. And Wygand was tired of it. He saw the facts, and he was going to come out with the truth. For deontology theory, we looked at the pros and cons of his decision, and we believe his motivation for coming public is above and beyond far greater than the consequences that we just went over. It's really it takes a big man to do something like that, in my opinion. I think 8 out of 10 people, maybe 9 out of 10 people would go the other way, especially nowadays. Um, okay, I'm going to lose my wife. I'm going to not have a relationship with my daughters that I want. Uh, I might be killed. My family might be hurt. I'm going to be up to my neck in lawsuits. But he really made the right choice. Now we're going to look at the resolution to virtue ethics and Bergman's decision to expose CBS. Like we discussed, Bergman's, I guess his staple in life is he has the most integrity of anybody. And really, I think he would make a good salesman. The way he pitched the interview to Wygand, all the promises he made, and he really did deliver everything until he got stabbed in the back by CBS. So Pew Research Center's Project for Excellence in Journalism says that journalism should provide citizens with accurate and reliable information they need to function in a free society. So really not in just the story Wygand had to tell, but in any story that Bergman was going to bring to the public, he felt there was something that weren't being told. I want to be the guy to bring the story. We discussed the interview earlier in the movie with the sheep. Americans must have had some type of fear of this guy. They didn't know who he was, what he was about. Hey, I'm going to bring it to the light. I want to show you what it's about. The Society of Professional Journalists states as part of their code of ethics that the first and foremost goal is to seek the truth and report it. Bergman is portrayed as doing that, but eventually feels betrayed by CBS because they want to. So basically, Bergman saw this, got so wrapped up in the story of Wygand that he felt like it was a personal attack against him. Someone with that much integrity, value, and putting all of his eggs in the basket with Wygand in the story, and it's really going to turn the tobacco world upside down, and to have your bosses and corporate offices tell you, we're going to run the episode, but we're going to edit it a little bit. We don't think we're going to run the show now. After he sees the life change that Wygand has been through, the smear campaign that big tobacco put on Wygand's life, Bergman really felt like, okay, you're stabbing me in the back, and in turn I'm stabbing Jeffrey in the back. So he really just wanted to get the story out there, and he also wanted to help be the voice for the people as well. And telling a journalist who lacks integrity is the best way to start a fight. Bergman does this with Wallace and others from CBS by linking his story to the New York Times on a free journal. This finally gets the network to air the unedited interview. There's a part in the movie where Bergman called a gentleman on the phone. He's in another newsroom. The guy's like, okay, give me 10 minutes and I'll call you back. And as Bergman wouldn't just be feeding him a line because everybody knows Bergman's integrity. So he calls him back, and Bergman gives him the scoop that CBS is sitting on this huge story, and they're not going to air the real truth about it. And he gives the guy the scoop. They run it in the New York Times, and Mr. Wallace, the man that does the interviews for 60 Minutes, goes up to Bergman and telling him, I'm feeling really bad about my decision for going along with what the corporation wanted. We should air this. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've never lacked any integrity. And basically that's what the newspaper article called all of CBS out of. So, to wrap things up, we find that Mr. Wygand and Mr. Bergman were both faced with extremely difficult ethical dilemmas, the pressure and magnitude of these dilemmas and the decisions that they had to make um, impacted so many people. It really does impact millions of people. I could say all of the United States and even further as far as the big tobacco company reach goes. Um, it's really not something as small as telling a lie to your wife about your diet. Yeah, I mean, I didn't eat the cheeseburger, I ate a salad for lunch. It was really something so humongous that these two men had all this pressure on them. They both did make the correct choices and inform the masses and tell the truth. Even though Wygand was scrutinized, his life was torn apart, and he was pushed to the brink of suicidal thoughts, I don't think he regrets anything. Um, the one part towards the conclusion of the movie, uh, they showed the unedited version of the interview, and Wygand is in an apartment by himself, or not an apartment, in a hotel room by himself, and Bergman sees the edited version run, and as Wygand had to watch it, and the whole world was watching it. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, this guy, his wife left him, he's all alone, he's probably going to do something stupid. So Bergman, who's on a beach with his wife, gets on the cell phone. I'm going to call this guy. He gets on the phone with a bellboy at the hotel, a bellboy at the hotel, and he's like, "You have so and so in your building. Get him on the phone. This could be life or death." Bergman's losing reception, literally. And then this shows the virtue ethics in Bergman, literally standing in the ocean trying to get a good cell service so he can talk to Wygand, reassure him, let him know he's not giving up, and letting him know he's done the right thing, that it will work out. And that's really what has stuck with me after watching this movie, is knowing the consequences that he faced and the truth that he had to tell, and that he still did the right thing. And that goes for Bergman as well, to go up against a corporation as big as ABS, and not caring about losing your job or what you'll look like to your peers. They stood for the right thing. In Wygand's case, he could have just stayed a teacher at school, had his family, just, okay, my other job, big tobacco, they stabbed me in the back, they kicked me out. But he broke his silence and called him out, and more people were for the better because of that. So before we conclude and you jump on our discussion board, I just want you guys to put yourself in the shoes of Wygand and Bergman, and feel like these types of decisions and dilemmas, and how would you deal with them. So we want to thank you guys for viewing, and we'll try to keep up with your comments as best as we can on the discussion board.